Let's move on to some supporter questions about Assassin's Creed Shadows. And I'm laughing because we all know what's coming, Alex.
I know.
Let's bring up this question for... Alex, can you put the question back on the sheet? Thank you.
Yeah, it's back. It's back.
Yeah, this question from Kaveh Gorbati. Not to be too dramatic, but I really disagree with something Alex said in a previous direct. I think AC Shadows is yet another example of RTGI looking horrible without RTAO. Looks like Software Lumen. I really got my hopes up that the new Anvil tech would have done what Alex said. But I'm once again looking at UE3 SAO. I guess I don't have a question, but I'm asking for an apology.
Let's just go back to UE3
He's not angry, Alex. He's disappointed.
If you want to look at what the heck that looks like, load up Arkham Asylum or Gears of War 2, and that is awful looking stuff. That is a hyperbolic statement if I ever saw one. To say the least, it is a lot more advanced than Software Lumen, both in terms of coverage and detail. It's a lot better. Its stability is way higher than Software Lumen. That is really obvious just playing the game. It's pretty rare to see actually any sort of boiling artifacts or extreme amounts of screen space information. So no, definitely not. The thing about any game like this in general, it's a large open world. Their BVH needs to have simplifications in it to run on console hardware or even mid-spec PC hardware, right? And so there are things that are not in their BVH, which will have then only probe and SSGI contributions to them in the G buffer. And, that is going to make them look a bit more screen spacey. So you would see that more a bit on characters, as well as on dynamic objects that after they've been sliced or something like that. I think when they're sliced, they stop being world space at that point. But those things are more few and far between. And really, go to the video hopefully is out by the time you're seeing this. Go to that video. The difference is so massive. I have really no idea what you're talking about. Like, the game looks like that SSAO junk stuff you're used to like before, and then you turn it on after and it looks completely different. So I would be really curious what you're seeing. And maybe if it's not a bit of you are used to things being overly ambient occlusioned, is another thing. Like, you're used to things being over darkened. I'd be curious if maybe that is what is happening.
I think my favorite ambient occlusion was, I don't know if you ever saw it, LA Noire.
Oh yeah, I've seen
where
that.
It was kind of like almost like some licorice that was like overlaid on the corners. It was like
another amazing one is the one in Fear 2. If you want to go back and see some incredible SSAO play Fear 2, nowadays, oh my God, just Google it. It's good.
Let's move on to the next question. No apology then, Alex.
No apology, definitely not. No, it looks great.
Not even an apology if he was offended. Which is to say,
well, maybe there.
The famous politician's apology. There.
I'm sorry if you think you were offended.
This question from James Dene. Gentlemen, I am a simple man. I love Assassin's Creed games, old and new. Shadows is a visual delight. A subjective question, if I may, to fill the news vacuum. Is it more interesting to analyse and review custom engines like Ubisoft's Anvil than Unreal, or is it all much of a muchness? Yours very sincerely and respectfully, a shinobi in the shadows. So I'm going to come to you again on that, Alex, because the answer, I guess, will be resoundingly yes, because we're seeing...
It's a huge yes. You can go
to talk about.
Well, the thing is, you don't know. Like, it's much more of an unknown number. So when you load it up the first time, you are generally greeted with questions and mysteries that you want to find out. And I find that that's the great part about custom technologies. Unlike Unreal, most of the time it is the exact off-the-shelf technologies you've seen already in potentially dozens of games. So there isn't anything surprising. And when you see artifacts, you start to expect them in games. When you see stutters, you start to expect them in games. Loading up Assassin's Creed for me was a joy because I am so used to very technically ambitious, dense open world games being CPU-matic problems. And here, it is very smooth and it is great. That's why I think, Oliver, you mentioned like when you were doing your work on it, like remind you a bit of Kingdom Come 2 with like the level of polish on release was another thing.
Yeah.
I think like you're saying here, James, I think it's a real delight and it's a really good looking game. So I'm really happy to look at this much more than I am an Unreal title, actually.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Final question. The mighty Ethan asks, hey DF exclamation point, do you think it's a major mistake for Ubisoft to cap the hideout area to 30 FPS in all modes? I've heard other podcasts talk about it as feeling terrible. Even people who normally don't care about frame rate and would be perfectly happy to play a game at 30 FPS. They say entering the hideout is jarring and it feels like it's running at less than 20 exclamation point. 30 FPS can be okay once you get used to it, but jumping between refresh rates prevents that. If even non-technically minded gamers are bothered, is this potentially a real problem for the game? Thank you for your thoughts! Exclamation point. So Oliver, I think there's probably some merit to the concept of a jarring switch between 30 to 60 frames per second. Mm-hmm. Was it a mistake? I'm guessing that there's things that are happening in the hideout, possibly further on in the game, as you know, that kind of warrant that.
I would need to see what the hideout looks like in the end game, because certainly in the early game, it seems like a pretty pedestrian area that you can just tweak and have fun with your heart's content and build like stables and blacksmiths and things like this. But it's not that crazy in terms of complexity. I think it makes sense, a lot of sense on say PS5 or Series X in their respective performance modes. If they wanted to kick in a 30 FPS refresh, because there you're dealing with the transition between the normal baked GI that's in Anvil to the RTGI system. And so presumably there to maintain decent image quality, you'd have to lower the refresh. That makes sense. But on like a PS5 Pro in its performance mode, it feels very jarring. Even in the balanced mode, you weren't getting a 40 FPS hideout. It's still a 30 FPS hideout. That's certainly odd. But that seems to be an approach they take across the games. Like on all platforms, they kick in 30 FPS cutscenes, right? So it seems to just be like something a route they've decided to go down with this particular title, and that extends beyond the hideout.
What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, maybe so in a city there's less like interactable things than potentially a hideout could have at endgame. Like all these things that you interact with, and they produce game economy stuff, etc. Mm-hmm. Maybe CPU in that aspect, kind of doubt it. I also agree. I think especially on platforms like PS5 Pro and PC doesn't have the 30 FPS hideouts, by the way, but it does have 30 FPS cutscenes, and I disagree very strongly with that. I think that like in any game should be completely a user option. The game already does offer frame rate capping, and it is obviously capable on the programmatic side to switch it on and off at a whim. Mm-hmm. So I think it should be good to allow the user to do that. I also think they need to fix the issue on PC where cutscenes are 31 FPS and not 30 FPS. A lot of people have commented on that. I have as well too, on social media, I believe, or elsewhere. So yeah, I think in general, I do not like just arbitrary frame rate capping at all usually, and especially for the point of this is going to be running on a PS6 one day, this is going to be running on a massive PC of the future. It's really going to suck if it's only 30 FPS in like 10 years, right? So let's get rid of that.
Yeah, I've got issues with jarring changes to frame rate. I guess there is 30 FPS cutscenes, 60 FPS gaming. I don't like it, but I can kind of understand why it happens. But for it to happen within gameplay, it is very, very jarring, actually. I don't think that's a particularly good move, but there must be a reason for it. On a sort of tangent, I was playing Indiana Jones and The Great Circle during my recent GPU reviews. It's got multi-frame gen support now. And it was odd because multi-frame gen didn't seem to work in the first level, the recreation of Raiders of the Lost Ark's intro. And I realized it probably doesn't because you're constantly switching between cutscenes that are capped to 60, and then your gameplay would be going up to like into the hundreds. But that was actually a problem just generally in the game, where basically every time a cutscene happened, you'd be going down to 60 anyway. And I think this sort of concept of having the ability of the game to run arbitrary frame rates and then other bits of the game not capable of running at arbitrary frame rates, I think it's a bad move.